Gavin from Newcastle, England. You recently talked about the unsuccessful run of Bret Hart in WCW and how in many respects they dropped the ball with him. Had history gone differently and Shawn Michaels had been the one to jump to WCW, do you think he would have been more successful? I think he probably would have been, as he had more friends in high places like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. He also had more left in the tank than Bret did at that stage in his career, since he was pre-bad back caused by the casket match. I think that had Shawn Michaels been the one to go to WCW back then instead of Bret Hart, it would have ended up as a disaster for Shawn Michaels in WCW. I don't see that working. There may have been an initial bump. He may have had a couple of big matches, but I think before long it would have been a complete and total disaster. He was all drugged up back then. I'm sure a lot of those guys were, but he was not in a good place. He was difficult to work with. And, Hall and Nash, maybe Nash to some extent. I mean, Hall was already having problems at that point. I'm not sure how much stroke that, he really had. So, yeah, I mean, he would have been protected to some degree, but it wouldn't have changed the fact that Hulk Hogan was still the top dog. So don't think for a second that, when Bret Hart came in, Hogan wasn't keeping him at bay, wasn't keeping him at arm's length. After a few months, Bret had turned heel. He joined the NWO. They squandered whatever they may have had coming off Montreal, one of the hottest incidents in wrestling history. And now they have this guy, the uncrowned, unofficial world champion from the other organization, and they completely botched the whole thing. And then they turned him heel, and he was just another guy. He was another dude in the black and white, subservient to Hulk Hogan. Of course, before long, I think there was a match on Nitro. He was teaming up in tag team matches with Hulk Hogan. Hogan knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what he had to do to protect his spot. Had Shawn Michaels been the one to come in, he probably would have felt even more threatened. And believe you me, before long, it would have been Shawn Michaels teaming up in tag matches with Hulk Hogan. And I'm sure Shawn would have had, a problem with that. Why is this guy getting pushed and not me? And I should be the one going over and not him. Believe me, there would have been a ton of problems. And WCW would not have known what to do with Shawn Michaels. They wouldn't have known what to do with him. You really think he would have gone there and he would have ended up being the top guy? Michaels could have wrestled circles around every single one of those guys. He would have been the best in-ring performer they had, and they still would have found a way to botch the whole thing. So, yes, he did have friends there. He may have been happier there, but I think in the end, he was much better off staying where he was, working for Vince McMahon, and I think in a lot of ways it may have saved his life. Vince McMahon supported him. He kept him employed. He kept the paycheck coming into him. Michaels got hurt. He went away. And it was during that downtime from his injury that he hooked up with Whisper of the Nitro Girls, who I think Kevin Nash set him up with her. I think she was a born-again Christian at that time, and Michaels was still having some substance abuse issues. He was supposed to come back and wrestle in 2001 and showed up in no condition to perform. There was a lot of bad blood even with him and Triple H. They had a falling out. And in the end, Michaels found Jesus or whatever. He found God and credits his wife for that, and they seem to be one big happy family now, and Michaels put that all behind him. He came back. He had a whole second half of his career and seemingly was a lot easier to work with, and he wasn't walking around saying, I won't lay down for anybody. It was like a different person. Had he gone to WCW? Who knows if any of that would have happened? You think Eric Bischoff and them gave a shit? Shawn's doing his thing. Everybody was probably all pilled up back then. So being around those guys, being around other guys that were doing the same thing, it's not like Triple H, he was his babysitter in WWE, was sucking down pills and sticking needles in his arm. The one thing about Triple H was he's always been a clean guy. He doesn't drink. He didn't do hard drugs. I mean, who knows what other kind of chemicals maybe he was putting in his body later on. I can't really comment on that. But I do think that being in WWE may have saved his life, because he was going down a bad path, and WCW was the Wild West back then. Guys were doing whatever the hell they wanted to do. Everybody had their own agenda. There was no organization. At least in WWE, you knew the buck stopped with Vince McMahon. In WCW, you didn't know who to go to. At first it was Bischoff, then Bischoff got ousted. Then Vince Russo came in to write, and they brought in this guy, they brought in that guy, they brought Bischoff back. That lasted all of 3 months. I just think it would have ended up being a disaster had Shawn gone to WCW, for him and for the company.